The best advice I got was to not worry so much early on about getting busy and all of that stuff that we all think about when we're first starting. And of course, that's the only thing you worry about. And they told me stuff like, especially because I was interested in academics, get your research, machine up and running, and figure out how you're going to be an educator, and figure out how you're going to, work with having fellows and residents in the OR, and get everything in place. And I kind of listened, but I think that you're so eager to get busy fast that I probably wish I would have heeded their advice a little bit more soundly. My observation on treating patients is that the second you treat somebody as if they're a VIP, usually that goes down a path that you're not going to be thrilled about. And I understand that, there's some VIPs that are going to get some kind of special care from patient services and make sure their stay is seamless, and that's going to happen. And I think we all appreciate that. But as a surgeon, and especially as a doctor, both, I think you have to take the mentality or the approach that says, I'm going to treat everybody the same with respect to their medical care. I think the biggest mistake that people make is that not doing that, and that's where shortcuts get into play. Oh, we're not going to get that blood test. Oh, we're not going to do that physical exam maneuver. Oh, we're not going to disrobe that person because they're a celebrity. And then that carries into the operating room. You treat the patient's pathology irrespective of what their notoriety is. And again, I think that I've seen too often now in my role as a chair, as sitting at morbidity mortality conferences every month. And, it doesn't happen often, but sometimes complications do occur. And I think that those are avoidable complications in VIPs. So my advice to everybody is the same, that when you're a surgeon and you walk into the operating room, don't change your procedure. Don't change your rhythm and your flow because somebody is a VIP or they're a family member or they're a loved one or whatever it might be, because that usually gets us off our rhythm and does the exact opposite of what you're hoping to do, which is to have an outstanding outcome for your patient. Mentorship, Sina, is something that has been part of my passion since the very early days. And I think for sure, to answer your question, my style has changed over the years. I think hopefully for all of us, we have self, and I like to call it self and situational awareness, to understand that not all styles work with all mentees, first of all. So that goes without saying. Even at this stage in my career, I can't use the same style of mentorship for every person that I'm working with. So you have to, even in a day, I've had 17 meetings today. It's my administrative day. I've had several mentorship meetings with students and with residents and with young faculty. And I would say the style in all of those has been somewhat nuanced. I've certainly become a better listener over the years. I think that's a critical feature to being a good person. Probably goes back to home, being a good listener with your partner and your children. And I certainly made many mistakes there and have learned a lot from that. And then I think as a mentor specifically, one of the challenges that you have in the role of leadership as a chair is that you get all the HR problems that occur in a department. And in a department like mine with 400 plus people, over 50 faculty, 31 residents, 22 fellows, a lot of staff, there's a lot of HR issues that happen almost on a daily basis. Usually people are well-meaning, and usually they're well-meaning and so-called, I like to say that faculty sometimes who get into trouble are usually junior or early in their practice. And one of the common themes I hear, or the phrases I hear, is, I'm just advocating for my patient. And I love that phrase because my response to that is, do you think that I'm not advocating for my patient, or that your senior partners aren't advocating? We are all advocating for our patients, but sometimes that insecurity of being a junior faculty member gets in the way, and that so-called advocacy ends up doing the exact opposite of what you hope it would do, which is to get the exact people you need to help you facilitate your smooth operating room, getting the patient in the room, maybe getting a second flip room, maybe getting your patient in a little earlier. All those things that will help with some of your anxieties can actually be blocked by the people if you don't make them your friends. So my challenge to my faculty, especially with that specific issue, is figure out how to work on your interpersonal skills, interpersonal relationships, where you might be getting yourself into trouble and butting heads when all of that needs to go away, because we need to work collaboratively as surgeons, and we cannot do what we do without everybody rowing the boat in the same direction. The one thing that you don't know about this chair that I sit in, being a chair, is that you don't really appreciate the HR issues. I think that's the unspoken, truth about this job. And as a vice chair, you think you know what the chair is doing, actually. And I use the example, Sina, at least in American football, there's offensive and defensive coordinators, and they're often the hottest new thing on the block, and everybody wants them to be the head coach. And then they get paid a bunch of money, a huge pile of money, to be a head coach, and they suck as a head coach. They don't do well. And you would have thought, well, they were right there with the head coach. They were in all those meetings. Of course, those skills are going to translate. And I think it's true of vice chairs, of residency program directors, who you think will be great chairs, and they just don't turn out to necessarily be that. I do think it's a different phenotype. I think it's a different skill set. And yeah, there's a lot of stress involved with this position. You have all sorts of allegations that you might have to deal with. You have, people not behaving well. You have mental health issues. You have, other health issues. So a lot of things that you don't really think about when you necessarily think about anyway, when you sit down to contemplate being a chair. I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, a place I'm sure you've never been, Sina. So I grew up, of course, if you grew up in North Dakota, you have to play ice hockey. That's a rite of passage. So I was a goalie, played all the way through high school, and then actually played at Stanford. You wouldn't expect to play hockey in California, but we actually had a club sport team. But tennis was really my sport that I was passionate about. And so I played competitively through high school, and then I taught. Stanford was the players there were way too good for me. So I taught tennis and got involved with some club level sports teams there at that. So I played tennis really my formative growing up years. And then, of course, through medical school and residency and starting fellowship and then practice, I didn't play tennis for many years. I would play periodically on holiday. And then the pandemic got me back on the tennis courts for the first time, kind of really in decades. And so I really started to resume my love of tennis. And then that craziest sport that you might have heard about called pickleball came into my life during the pandemic, because all of a sudden you couldn't necessarily go into indoor tennis courts, but you could go play pickleball. So pickleball has taken over the US for sure. And it's a wonderful sport. And so my wife and I have been playing. My younger daughter, who's a really accomplished tennis player, doesn't really love pickleball, but she'll sometimes accommodate her father and go out on the court with us. So our weekend getaway is to go to into Long Island. We have a house there that we purchased in 2019, and just spending some time with the family, playing some tennis or pickleball, and being outside the craziness of New York City. And this job is a nice respite for me. I think that it's a great question, and there's a book that I give to lots of people. I give it to residents and fellows, and to visiting. When I go to graduations, I often will give it to the graduating residents. It's a book called Essentialism by Greg McCown. Greg's a professor at Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. For the folks who don't know where Wharton is in Australia, and it's a fantastic book. Essentialism basically looked at really highly successful people and tried to understand, kind of what was their pathway to success. And the concept's pretty straightforward. Basically, when you're early in your career, in whatever field we're in, the answer is that you always say yes to any question asked of you, because you're trying to build your reputation, build your brand. You want to be known as somebody that doesn't say no to things. You want to be able to close on those deals, quote unquote, and complete the projects, complete the tasks. So those highly successful people develop that reputation for being able to do just that. As you continue your trajectory upward, obviously you start to be asked to do things that are, quote, non-essential, end quote. And the fear that you have as that individual is, if you say no, you will somehow come careening off your trajectory of success, and that they will stop asking you to do things and you will crash and burn. And of course, the concept of essentialism is that just the opposite occurs. When you define your core mission and you define your core vision, and you start to say yes to only those things that are essential to your core mission, you no longer dilute your brand, you no longer dilute your products, and your upward trajectory actually is accelerated in those people that Professor McCown interviewed in his journey on essentialism. So as I tell my graduates, my mentees, and young faculty, this is not a book for when you're 0 to 5 years in practice, coming out of your orthopedic fellowship or whatever field you're in. But once you get to years 6 through 10, and certainly beyond, then saying no to non-essential things, saying yes to essential things, will dramatically change your outlook. And I'll give you a great example. So I'm a past president of the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons. The annual meeting is in Scottsdale, Arizona on October 6th through the 8th. As you can imagine, I have a fair number of responsibilities at that meeting, even as a past president. And I just found out 4 days ago that my youngest daughter, Claire, who we just dropped off for college at Johns Hopkins, has the first family family gathering, October 6th through the 8th. Same exact dates as the American Shoulder and Elbow Surgeons meeting. So I looked at those two things and I immediately said, ASES, as important as it is to me professionally, is not more important than my daughter and my wife are personally. And so I canceled everything related to Scottsdale, and I'm going to Baltimore to be with my family. That's probably harder to do if I'm 3 years in practice, honestly, right? You have commitments, you're supposed to be on the podium, you're hoping that you'll get asked the next year, etc. So I think that's a great real life example that just happened in the last few days.